If a crisis hits now, you're going to see $10,000 gold, easy. In fact, the more you study it, the more it seems absurd to be under $10,000 an ounce. There is a financial crisis out in the future. I think it is 30 seconds to midnight right now. I think it's going to probably come before this next election, as I'm sure almost everybody in this room is. I'm very worried about the United States of America right now. We are really at a crossroads. I'm sorry, I normally try and stay away from politics completely, but it just seems like the legal system has been weaponized. Yeah. And we've seen things happen in this country that we've never seen before. When the crisis hits and people are seeking a safe haven, as they always do, normally about 98% of all the currency seeks treasuries as the safe haven. There's going to come a point where a lot of these people say to themselves, well, am I going to get paid back? I think that we have an incredibly bright future if we can make it through the next 5 years. Yeah. I think between AI and robotics, that we're going to see levels of prosperity. It's going to be a completely different level. But can we get there without inventing a virus that wipes out humanity or blowing ourselves up or something like that?
Please welcome to the stage George Gammon and our Mike Maloney, ladies and gentlemen.
So Mike, what do you think about the gold market right now?
Well, you know, there are so many different things converging right now. Robert wrote a book years ago called Rich Dad's Prophecy, and that was basically about the age demographic, and we're hitting this cliff right now where there's going to be so many more people that we've got to take care of that are basically a societal burden than people behind them to work and support them. And we're coming up to that when we've got the biggest hyper bubbles of, I mean, everything is in a hyper bubble. And then we've got all of this chaos. And my presentation at Limitless is crisis plus chaos equals catastrophe. And this is how to prosper, profit, and protect yourself during chaos, crisis, and catastrophe.
What do you think moves the price of gold the most? This is something I've been trying to figure out, and Dan and I were talking about this earlier. But it's if you look at a price or a chart of gold going back to like the 1970s, it's really tough to pinpoint exactly what moves it, especially in the short term. How do you think about that?
Chaos, crisis, and with a lag, the currency supply. That's really what I think it is. You know, right now, I mean, at Rebel Capitalist Live, that was 9 months ago, right? So it was November or December of last year. Okay. And I held up a tube of gold eagles that cost me $6,500 in 2003. And they were 41,000 at that event, and today they're 53,000. They've gone up 30%. And it's a physical asset that you can hold. You know, but I do want to say, everybody calls me like the gold and silver guy, and I'm not. I'm an economics guy, and I'm a monetary history guy first. Before gold and silver is just an answer to a problem that we've got right now. If we were using reasonable economics to run the world monetary system, you know, you've uncovered most of the problems that underlie our monetary system, the way finance is done, and it's all a bunch of hocus pocus voodoo as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I have a different view. I have a view that it's not necessarily the money or the system of money, it's the involvement of the government. I actually think that a fiat money system without the government is superior. Because because the fiat is created by the banking system, they're lending it for productive purposes, and therefore the money supply itself can go up and down.
Where does the energy come from when they type a new digit of currency into existence?
Well, it doesn't need it because it's for productivity if it's on the bank's balance sheet. Now what happens is you get the government involved, and then they start creating currency units. To use your terminology, the correct terminology, they start creating currency units for things other than productivity. But if you're creating currency units exclusively for productive purposes, then you would want a money supply that fluctuates with those levels of productivity. And with a currency supply or money supply that can't go up or down, well, it can go up, but it can't go down, really, then you don't have that opportunity. So ideally, I think you'd have a fiat currency that is completely controlled by the private sector, and the only way that a currency unit would come into existence is if it was attached to productivity or more goods and services.
Yes, but there's an initial purchasing power that new unit of bank credit that you're talking about has to have when it comes into existence, and the only way that it gets it is by stealing purchasing power from all the other units of currency in existence.
Initially you're right, but then what happens is that currency unit that is created that increases the money supply, that technically without a lag would increase prices, all else being equal, is going to create more widgets or more goods and services, and then it's going to be paid off. So when it's done, when you go round trip, then the money supply is back to where it was to begin with, because that payment is going to decrease the money supply. But the net result is you're going to have more goods and services that could lead to the productive type of deflation that we all want.
True, but you get with a fixed currency supply, you still get the inflation and deflation. When you've got demand that is higher than the supply, prices go up, and when you've got a supply that's higher than the demand, prices go down. But you're not stealing from anybody when you borrow the currency. When you borrow the currency into existence, and it didn't exist before, the purchasing power comes through theft. And yes, you do pay it back, and the currency vanishes.
With more goods and services.
Yes.
Because the additional credit, if it's lent productively, should create more goods and services than you had before.
Yeah, I guess my moral compass is turned up a little too high because I just don't believe in theft. And with the government, with treasuries and stuff, it's theft and enslavement, because if you pay any taxes, you are enslaved. You're paying those taxes to pay off treasuries.
Yeah.
And which is the birth of the Federal Reserve currency units. So a treasury bond, they type currency into existence, and they have to buy a government-backed security. It's got to be a treasury, or since Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were federalized, a mortgage-backed security. And
right. So what do you attribute the price movement from 80 to 2000 when it was going down?
From?
With gold.
With gold. From what to 2000?
1980 to 2000.
Well, it's supply and demand, and the fact that gold isn't the money that we're currently using. It's money, but it's competing against fiat currency. And so there's this competition going back and forth for purchasing
because
power.
We took it off the gold standard, there wasn't that demand, but we had all this additional supply because the price came up.
I like gold. I don't like gold standards. Gold standards are just a way of cheating gold.
Right. But your idea is why the price went down is because we had all this additional supply come online because the price is high. So the producers were incentivized to produce, but then we had demand go down because it wasn't attached to money. So you had this imbalance between supply and demand until that leveled out in 2000, and then it went ahead and ripped higher.
Yes, and there's a balance between money and the currency system as well. And I think we haven't even gotten to a crisis yet. There is a financial crisis out in the future. I think it is 30 seconds to midnight right now. I think it's going to probably come before this next election. And I think you're going
in November.
Maybe when you guys are partying at the Collective in Las Vegas. I don't know.
When they're watching the Eagles, Life in the Past.
Right. And so I see that when the crisis hits and people are seeking a safe haven, as they always do, normally about 98% of all the currency seeks treasuries as the safe haven.
Yeah.
And there's this 2% of all the nuts like me that go for gold and silver or cryptos, right?
Yeah.
Those are like the safe havens that are sort of outside the system. But we're at a level of debt to GDP, and then the dollar is under attack from the BRICS countries, and basically every country in the world that is not the US is like, but it's going to, unless it's a big crisis that is like a crumbling of the financial system globally, it's going to take a long time. I mean, it's chipping away at the dollar. But there's going to come a point, I think, where a lot of these people, the 98%, where a certain percentage of those people say to themselves, well, am I going to get paid back? If I loan my currency to the government, if I buy a treasury and I'm loaning my currency to the government for 2 years or 10 years or 30 years, am I going to get paid back? And, you know, or am I going to get paid back in the same dollars? Will it be a different dollar? I am very, you know, as I'm sure almost everybody in this room is, I'm very worried about the United States of America right now. We are really at a crossroads, and the stuff that I see happening with censorship and with manipulation, and you know, we've got Robert Kennedy Jr. supposed to be joining us here, and what they've done to him, it almost, all of these things that they've been doing to try, that, I'm sorry, I normally try and stay away from politics completely, but it just seems like the legal system has been weaponized, and we've seen things happen in this country that we've never seen before. And it reminds me very much, you know, when you study history, of what was happening in Germany in between the Weimar Republic and the Great Depression. When that's when, during that time, is when Hitler really gained power. But the things that have been happening are just, it is scary. Now, part of my presentation, I'm going to, Robert, you know, Robert was my mentor. Robert took me around the world between 2004 and 2010, presenting to audiences and stuff. And he used to teach the 5 Gs. And so, you know, on his right board, the 5 Gs, ground, grub, gas, guns, and gold. And I've got gold, so now what I'm doing is trying to put the rest of them together. But, you know, thank you, Robert. I've really learned a lot from you.
Great teacher.
Yeah.
You are.
You know, one thing I always am curious about is this unprecedented or is it cyclical? So
I think it's cyclical with a twist.
Because the 1960s, like I wasn't there, but I heard that was some crazy stuff going on.
Oh yes, yeah.
And like
this is crazier though. It really is.
Doug was saying that he was, I think he was giving the example, he was in Washington, D.C., might have been the late 60s. And he actually he was taking a gal out to dinner, and he had to go a completely separate way because they had just tear gassed like some protesters or something like that. Like this similar stuff that you see today.
Yeah.
That, you know, I look at it and say, my gosh, this is going downhill fast. But maybe it's just.
I'm sure it's a cycle, but we didn't have.
Is it worse now, or is it different?
It's very different because of big tech and the ability to track people. And it's, the 60s was a very chaotic period, and it did seem like the world, I saw a video, there's very few like family videos that we've got, but I saw one that was probably done right around 70 or 72. And I didn't have much hope for the future. I didn't expect to be alive right now. I didn't expect humanity to be alive right now. But you know, if we don't, I think that we have an incredibly bright future if we can make it through the next 5 years.
Yeah.
I think between AI and robotics, that we're going to see levels of prosperity that are just like, it's going to be a completely different level. But can we get there without inventing a virus that wipes out humanity or blowing ourselves up or something like that? I mean, today, we are just, every moment for the past year or so, we've been minutes away from nuclear war.
Yeah, right.
It's an insane world, and somebody needs to rein in these politicians. I'm not like one party or the other. I'm a libertarian, and I watch in horror at these, and entertainment, at all of these people that are so down party lines, but they're all the problem with libertarians, the last time we had libertarian government was the beginning of the United States. That was like the first real experiment in true freedom. And now Javier Milei in Argentina is doing the next. I mean, it's been 200 years since we've done this, and he's trying it again. And look at what happened. In just like 7 months, the poverty rate went from 58% to 49%. They got out of a recession that was expected to last like another year or two because of all of his cuts and so on. It's just absolute miracles that are happening so quickly when you follow Austrian economics, and sensible policies, and then butt out of everybody's business. Get out of business's business. If you get out of the way of the private entrepreneur, everything just gets so much better. But what we're doing today is just so much regulation and so much, I don't know, what was the question? I'm probably wandering off topic here.
No, I just always wonder if now it is truly getting worse, or if this is just something that we've seen where history in the United States repeats itself, and therefore there's a lot of room for optimism because the 1960s transitioned into the 70s, which transitioned into the 80s, which is a new time of prosperity. So maybe that's what we should expect going into the 2030s.
Well, actually there is no proof that Mark Twain said that history never repeats. It rhymes really well, or something like that, I'm paraphrasing. But I say history always repeats, but with little twists. Each time it repeats, it rhymes. It's different, but the same, like we go through these periods of chaos and then sort of calm and then chaos again. And we are going into one of those, but we're going into one of those with all of the markets in these super hyper bubbles. That's part of my presentation is like the stock markets are, there's only one way that you can measure them that doesn't show them at all-time historic highs, where they are way beyond any valuation that they've ever been before, and that's PE ratios. But when you measure them like the Buffett indicator and how many hours of work it takes to buy one share of the S&P 500, or there's just all these different ways, and it's like double the NASDAQ bubble or the 2007 bubble. It's the crash in 2008 was minuscule compared to what should be coming, and then after it, we've got the demographic cliff that Harry Dent wrote about, but Robert wrote about it much better in Rich Dad's Prophecy.
What do you think if you have to look out maybe 5 years, what is your base case for inflation, disinflation, deflation?
Well, the end of every hyperinflation is the ultimate deflation, because suddenly the currency is worth nothing. So all hyperinflations end up deflationary. But the dollar, there's so many dollars, and most of them reside outside of the United States. It would be very difficult for the dollar to go into a hyperinflation. Inflation, deflation, you have to ask yourself, is the Fed going to stop creating currency? Is the government going to stop deficit spending? Right. Do you really think that, Brent Johnson is betting that the dollar is going to go up. But what is that bet exactly? It's going to go up against what? It's going up against other currencies, and they're all falling at different rates. Gold was 253 in 1999, and today it's hovering right around, it's above and below 2,500, mostly above, and that's a big psychological barrier, another even number. If a crisis hits now, you're going to see $10,000 gold, easy. In fact, the more you study it, the more it seems absurd to be under $10,000 an ounce. There's so little of it compared to how many dollars exist.
Yeah, that's true. But the one thing about the dollar that I'll say is that it's only gone down relative to goods and services in the United States.
Correct.
So if you compare the dollar relative to goods and services in Japan, since let's say 2012, it's appreciated. India, same thing. Brazil, same thing.
What has gold done in Japan?
Well, if you're comparing it to gold, but if you're comparing it to what people actually compare it to, which is usually goods and services.
Right, but all those fiat currencies are falling compared to gold. Gold was 253, and now it's over 2,500. That means the gold didn't change. The dollar fell by 90% in 24 years.
Right. But think about how much the dollar appreciated from 1980 to 2000.
Against gold, you're talking about. Yes, it did. Yeah.
So that's I think why I'm not saying that people should go into the dollar, but to explain why someone in Argentina, as an example, would go into the dollar and they'd want that dollar more than they might want silver or gold. That's the explanation. It's not that it's completely irrational. It's that relative to their goods and services, that dollar has not only increased in purchasing power, but if they're buying treasuries, it's also paid them, 2, 3, 4, 5% per year.
Yeah, well, this is a leftover from the Bretton Woods conferences, and we got to sort of run the world monetary system. The majority of the representatives at the Bretton Woods conference didn't want this system when they went there. They wanted a different system, and we ended up with the US dollar being the world reserve currency and getting to run the game. There's so many dollars. And then the Federal Reserve, until just the past, till this century, the Federal Reserve was a lot more cautious and didn't create, Argentina was creating pesos willy-nilly and doing deficit spending with them, and then they had this raging inflation, and they defaulted on their debt a few times, and so nobody trusts the peso. So yes, they want dollars, because you can trust the dollar more. But the U.S. has the continental dollar went into a hyperinflation. The Confederate dollar hyperinflated to nothing. Robert gave me a Confederate dollar. Thank you, Robert. I think it was like $100 or something like that. The greenback, when it was introduced, it also went into a very short-term hyperinflation. It lost two-thirds of its purchasing power during the Civil War, and then later on I can't remember what the act was called, but the Resumption Act or something like that, and they backed it once again fully with gold. I don't see any politician that has any type of restraint when it comes to the spending that they want to do. And they promise us everything to get elected, and then they try to give us some of what they've promised. And it always, even with the Bretton Woods system, where there was no reserve ratio to gold that was specified, and it dropped from 40% down to around 8% before they had to end the Bretton Woods system. But even with that, our typical deficit spending, the government would spend 3 to 5% more than its income on the average every year. As soon as we ended that, it jumped up to 20% all through the 70s and 80s. Clinton got lucky, and there was the NASDAQ
surplus,
boom. And actually, there weren't any surpluses. That is a lie. It's a hocus-pocus accounting.
Was it an accounting gimmick?
Yes, because if there was actually a surplus during the Clinton years, the debt would have gone down. So my definition of surplus and deficit is you download a chart, you download a bunch of numbers, and you look for a year where we had less debt than we had the previous year, and then you know that we had a surplus.
Right.
If we've got more debt, then this budget surplus deficit, all these numbers that they give you, is a lie. And it is a lie. We've never had a year where we owed less than the previous year, unless you go back to, from the Revolutionary War, we paid down the debt. And the last time the U.S. was debt-free was under Andrew Jackson. And then we had the Civil War. We borrowed a bunch, but gold still limits how much they can borrow. So we got to about, I think it was about a third of our GDP that we were able to borrow. And then after that, they paid it down, and we grow the economy. Just the private sector is what causes most of the recoveries. It's not the government that causes recoveries. It's the private sector growing the GDP faster than the politicians can steal it from us and spend it. And when they do that, the debt to GDP goes down, even though they're still borrowing and spending. So it went up to 20%, and now it's 35%. Ever since 2008, the average is about 35% more than our income that we spend every year. How long can that go on before people stop trusting the dollar and go to some other? I expect that Bitcoin, other cryptos, gold, silver are going to go to some pretty astronomical prices in the future.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I don't think the problem is in the bond market. I think the problem is not servicing the debt. The problem, for me, is the government spending.
Yes.
And this is what I always say. Like if we go back to 2020 and we look at the problems that we've had in the economy, the majority of the problems, I would argue, is because the government locked everyone in a cage for 2 years. It
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily because the money supply increased by 25%. You know, it doesn't help, but then you ask, is the money supply increasing?
I would argue that the definition of inflation and deflation is the change in the currency supply, and that, the prices that the government tracks are certain retail prices, and whenever you create a new unit of currency, it's going to inflate something. And because the Federal Reserve is handcuffed by the Federal Reserve Act, that they can only buy, it specifies that they have to buy in the open market, and they have to buy securities that are guaranteed by the U.S. government. And that was U.S. Treasuries until the government nationalized Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and mortgage-backed securities also became guaranteed by the U.S. government. Ben Bernanke wrote about this in his paper, or his speech, Deflation, and making sure it doesn't happen here, from 2002. And it was just a roadmap to the future. You could he came up, one of the things he said is that the Federal Reserve could expand its menu of assets, like you're ordering dinner. Mm-hmm. And you go down this list of the things that the Federal Reserve could do once it reaches the zero bound. Once the interest rate has been dropped to zero, and you can't go very negative because people will just take cash and put it in a safe instead of paying to hold dollars in a bank credit. Once you reach the zero bound, he said, well, the Federal Reserve can pump currency into the currency supply by buying mortgage-backed securities and doing this and doing that. And he listed like 10 things, and 7 of them were done in 2008, 9, 10. It was really having a crystal ball, a roadmap to the future. And because the Federal Reserve is, the Federal Reserve Act says they have to buy through the open market, and they created their own open market. They don't go to the same stock market that you and I go to. There's between 18 and 30 primary dealers that are the largest brokerage houses in the world, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, and such. And they have to buy from these primary dealers. There's between 18 and 30 of them at any given moment. And they have to buy government-guaranteed securities. And so they're buying from a brokerage house, and they're buying securities, and there's a profit on it, and all those dollars go into the financial markets. So when a new dollar is created, it inflates the financial markets if it's created by the Federal Reserve. If they lower interest rates, it goes into real estate or something that you can borrow, and so it inflates that thing. And whenever it inflates something, that sector, quicker than the rest of the economy, you've got a bubble, and then the free market is going to try and snap that back eventually. But there's a big time lag, and that's called a crisis, and it's all the Federal Reserve's fault. Robert.
What this is, history proves that we don't learn from history.
So could you explain that this is not the first time this has happened? I mean, I can see time like the Fed doing this, interest rates doing that. It gives them fun. People don't see the history. So can you go back to the Chinese, Romans, and the Germans? Because this is happening again.
Yeah, right. John Law's France. Yeah.
Hi, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you for subscribing and mention that if you'd like to help our channel, please consider my company, Goldsilver.com, the next time you buy precious metals. We're one of the most trusted names in the industry. Our prices are sharp, delivery is fast, and we have an insiders program where you find out exactly what I'm doing with my own investments. Thanks for making Goldsilver.com your dealer, and now back to the video.
Yeah. Whenever, I think it was Kenneth Galbraith that said recurrently, mankind comes up with, they think that they've come up with some way of infinitely amplifying the money supply, and it's not going to have any, I can't remember the exact quote, I'm paraphrasing him, but John Kenneth Galbraith was under the Kennedy administration. He was the economics advisor, and he wrote several books, and they're great. But yes, we've done, the first, they did this in China. They have a very interesting, For my first book that I wrote for, by the way, my book would have ended up being this textbook that nobody bought, and Robert found a ghostwriter for me, and I sort of learned to write from Jake. So thank you, Robert. It would have never been published the way I'd originally written it. But in there was I found out later that it was extremely accurate, but there was a chapter on China. And so before, ancient Athens, before the first thing that I call a hyperinflation, during the Peloponnesian Wars, China was doing this, and they did it over and over and over again, and then finally they just went back to silver. But they started out with, shells and pearls and things like that as a medium of exchange. And then they started trading farm implements, knives and hoes and rakes and things. And then they made models of these farm instruments, and they became real small, so they were portable, and they had a little handle on a ring, so you could put them on a chain and keep your money on your currency on your necklace or carry it around. And they kept on shrinking until there was just this coin left, and it was called cash. And that's where the word came from. And I wasn't like 100% sure that I was accurate until I toured the Beijing Monetary Museum in China. And everything that I had written about was right there. I got to see it all firsthand. But they always think that they've got a way, to get around. Originally, the coinage was copper, and then they found out that if they did it in iron, they could make so much more because iron is so much cheaper. And they hyperinflated this physical currency supply. And then they came out with this new flying money, this lightweight money printed on rice paper. And it had this solemn oath from the emperor that this would retain its value, and of course it went to zero. and then several big inflations in Rome, to where they started out with pure gold and silver, and eventually they ended up with the silver coins were just copper with a little wash of silver over the, just like our coins that they're a sandwich. They're copper in the inside, and I think zinc and something else on the outside. I can't remember the mix. John Law's France. I mean, France was broke. This guy that sort of dabbled in economics, but he was basically just a gambler, presented this thing that what you have is an insufficient currency supply. So you've got to be able to create currency. And it was great for a couple of years, and then the whole thing imploded. So yes, we keep on repeating this thing over and over and over. And I wish I could remember John Galbraith's quote, because it is the best quote on that.
Would you say that that's what breaks down the empire?
Yes, it does. There wouldn't have been a Hitler if it wasn't for the Weimar hyperinflation. What was the name of his stormtroopers took over the Burgerbrau Keller. I think it was 1923. It was the last week of their hyperinflation. And to this literally captive audience, because they pointed machine guns at the front door, he gave a speech that changed the world. And all of those people followed him. The Beer Hall Putsch, it's called. So do an internet search on that. It is fascinating. Nobody knew who Hitler was until that day where he was speaking to an audience that had just been impoverished. The government took all of their purchasing power away from them. The currency was worthless, and so they were formerly middle class. Now they were broke and they were scared, and he had a scapegoat, somebody he could blame it on. And he went in there, the enemy. He came out a hero, and those people followed him in the, I can't remember what the night was when they tried to, his first attempt at overthrowing.
Burn down
No, the Reichstag, that was later. That was the false flag event. This was a uprising where he tried to overthrow the government, and most of the people that followed him were killed, and he ended up spending some time in prison. And during that time in prison, he was furnished with a secretary, Rudolf, is it? Yeah, Rudolf Hess, and he wrote Mein Kampf. Well, but he got to wear his own clothes, he was given a cell with a view, and he got visits from his German shepherd. I mean, it was like first-class jail. But writing Mein Kampf in there, so that if it wasn't for the Weimar hyperinflation, nobody would know the name Hitler. The hyperinflations in France were during this sort of caused the French Revolution. So it causes revolution, it causes war, it is the end of empires. And this is one of the things that I'm very worried about with the United States. We're trying to make Ukraine a NATO country. And that is the one thing that Putin has said, and he said, I've got a video from 2015 where he had just had a press conference, and the only place that you could find it was buried by the Western media. And he was saying the world is being dragged in an irreversible direction. And he was warning people, the Ukraine cannot be a NATO, we can't have a NATO country and military bases that close to Moscow. And this was exactly the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the shoe was on the other foot. And this somehow got buried by all Western media. Nobody was allowed to see that. And I ran across it on YouTube. I gave a presentation, and half of the presentation was about that in 2015 at the Silver Summit, because this frightened me that we were already having such censorship that the leader of Russia was censored in the United States, and so yes, Robert, yes to every question you've asked. The answer is yes, this brings down empires.
I'm based my point here because you study history to see the future.
Yes.
And the first time I brought him on the stage with Kennedy and all that, Kennedy called him Angel of Death. Because his forecast is so dire, yet accurate, based on history.
Yes, but my timing is never good. I always think it's going to happen faster than it does. But eventually, if I wait long enough, then I'm right.
What you say is just crap on most people, but you back it up by history. So my question is from here, what do you see happening in America and the world?
Wow. Well, personally, I think that everybody needs the 5 Gs. I am really afraid of what could happen in America, and we are at this turning point right now. And so I've got 900 acres of defensible property. I've got 3 rivers, so I've got my own water supply. I've got 4 buildings that are completely off the grid with solar and Tesla power walls. We are putting in hydroelectric. I see the potential of the United States collapsing, yes.
Civil War.
The Civil War. What's the future? The future, like I said, if we can survive the next 5 years, it's extremely bright. Once the singularity happens and artificial intelligence actually sort of becomes self-aware and gets away from us completely, if the code that it is launched with originally is written right, it should take care of us instead of seeing us as a pest. And then we have an incredibly bright future. But are we going to get there? And so for me, I had to do something. You want to plan for the worst but hope for the best. And so I have bets on both sides. I'm prepared should everything just go to hell. I will do better than 99.9% of the population. But if everything goes well, I'm going to have a $100 million operation with my farm. I'm really prepared for the worst, but I'm planning on the best, but preparing for the worst. So, our own water, power, food, and arsenal.
I'm happy. Question is, what do you see happening? If Delhi was calling for possibility of civil war,
that's a big debate.
Yeah. Well, my next step is to get a place in Medellin because I see the possibility of civil war and a collapse of this country, and there goes our property rights, so maybe the farm wasn't a good idea. Yes, I do see that, but it's a range of possibilities. I can't say that U.S. is going to collapse and everything is going to go to hell. That's just one of the things that could happen. But everything has a bell curve probability. But I see very, very fat tails on the end of total collapse. I really do. I think civil war.
What's the possibility of civil war?
Oh, I'd probably give it like a 20% probability or possibility. And I see nuclear war as a scary, World War III as a scary possibility right now, and I think it's much higher than 5%. I don't know if it's 50% or something like that. Hopefully somebody will rein in all of these crazy politicians because they're all trying to outmaneuver each other and nobody is talking about peace. So yes, the angel of death predicts that we have a possibility ranging from like nuclear war and civil war to an incredibly bright future if we can get through the next 5 years. But this is a critical moment.
I think you're skipping over about 350 million Americans with no money.
Oh yes, well you wrote about it in Rich. Right, you wrote about it in Rich Dad's Prophecy and what's going. Dan, what's Dan's name from EOS? Dan Larimer, an inventor of he used to, when Satoshi Nakamoto was inventing Bitcoin, he was one of the developers that was having conversations with him, on chat rooms. And he said that there really shouldn't be any taxation without any representation without net taxation. So if you're paying your own way through life, then you should be able to vote. But you shouldn't, if you're living at the behest of others, and the government is stealing wealth from one group of people to give to you, you shouldn't be able to vote for more.
Yeah. Didn't the property owners, wasn't it?
What?
You had to be a property owner to vote?
Originally, yes, yeah. You had to be, when the United States was founded, you had to be a property owner, which meant businessman back then. Yeah.
It's interesting about one of the hyperinflations you talked about in Rome, that was a result of effectively AI.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I actually I studied this for a video the other day. That's where the word, or the phrase, the dole, you're on the dole, that actually came from Rome.
Yeah.
Because what they did is they thought, well, look, we're so powerful, and why are we doing all the work? When we could just bring in slaves, and they could do all the work, just like AI, right? Just like robots. And they thought that this would just be this incredible wave of wealth, but what ended up happening is none of the Romans had money, although they had some of the stuff being produced by the slaves, so then the government put them on the dole.
Right.
And gave them money, and that's what triggered one of their
I know that 20% of the population of Rome was receiving daily distributions of wheat, and that's basically welfare, so they had welfare back then.
That's exactly
that was the dole.
Exactly what they called it. So it's interesting because we think that AI is definitely deflationary, but if you look at it through that lens, it could also be inflationary.
I don't think we're going to have to worry about the concept of currency and money once it takes over. I don't know, nobody knows what the future is beyond that point, whether we're going to survive or not. So I'm trying to balance sort of partying with worrying because have a good time at the Eagles, It's
like a vodka Red Bull of the future.
Yes, exactly.
Ladies and gentlemen, farmer Mike Maloney and Rebel Capitalist Gammon. Great shot.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Fabulous, as always. Hey, I got good news. Mike Maloney's going to come with us to dinner. So we can hang out, pick his brain, ask questions. Hey, we've got another segment, and then we're out of here. So.